The basement door was padlocked from the outside. A padlock. On the inside of my own son's house. I stood there in the dark with my pocket flashlight shaking in my hand, and I heard it again. That sound. A soft, dragging scrape like someone trying to move and failing. My knees nearly gave out right there on the stairs. My name is Russell Bennett. I'm 68 years old. I spent 41 years as a structural engineer in Akron, Ohio, mostly inspecting bridges and parking decks for the state. I know what load-bearing means. I know what a foundation looks like when it's been compromised. What I did not know, what I could not have imagined in 1,000 sleepless nights, was that the foundation of my own family had been rotting from the inside for years, and I'd been walking across it every day without feeling it shift. Let me back up. I have to tell this right. My wife Eleanor and I had one child, our son Nathaniel. We tried for years to have more after him. Eleanor had 3 miscarriages. After the third one, the doctor sat us down in that beige office on West Market Street and told us it wouldn't happen again. So Nathaniel was it. Our whole world. And I'll be honest with you, we spoiled him. Not with money, we didn't have much then, but with attention, with second chances, with looking the other way when maybe we shouldn't have. He grew up handsome, charming, smart enough to get a marketing degree from Ohio State. He married a woman named Tessa when he was 28. I remember Eleanor cried at the wedding, but not the happy kind. She told me later in the car driving home, "Russ, there's something behind that woman's eyes I can't see through." I told her she was being protective. I told her Sess was just nervous. I told her a lot of things that night, and I was wrong about every single one of them. Eleanor and I had built up something over the years. Nothing flashy. I made good money the last 15 years before retirement, and Eleanor had been a high school chemistry teacher for 32 years, with a state pension. We paid off the house in 2009. We had about $740,000 in retirement accounts, a paid-off Buick, and a little cabin up near Geneva on the lake that my father had left me. By American standards, comfortable. Not rich, but comfortable enough that when Nathaniel called 4 years ago saying he and Tessa wanted to start a consulting business, I wrote him a check for $60,000 without thinking twice. The business never materialized. I never asked for the money back. A year later, it was $40,000 for a medical thing with Tessa. I didn't pry. I just sent the wire. Then $25,000 for a down payment on a house they said they couldn't quite swing. Then $18,000 for a car after Nathaniel's broke down. Then smaller amounts. $5,000 here, $7,500 there, always with a story attached. Eleanor would frown and ask me about it. I'd tell her, "El, he's our boy. We can't take it with us." She'd press her lips together and not say anything, and that should have told me everything. Now I have to tell you about the thing that broke us. About 14 months ago, Eleanor started having bad headaches. Bad enough that her hand would shake when she lifted her coffee cup. We went to the Cleveland Clinic. They found a mass. Benign, thank God, but pressing on something it shouldn't have been pressing on. She needed surgery. She got the surgery. She came home weak, slow, a little foggy, but she came home. Tessa showed up at the house the day after Eleanor got home. I remember she brought a casserole, tuna noodle, which Eleanor had never liked in her life. Tessa sat at our kitchen table and looked at Eleanor with this concerned expression and said, "You know, Mom, with everything you've been through, maybe it'd be good if you came and stayed with us for a while, just to recover, just so Dad doesn't have to be a nurse on top of everything." Eleanor said no. She said it quietly, but she said it. She wanted to be in her own house. That was September. By Thanksgiving, Tessa had brought it up 4 more times. Each time Eleanor said no. Each time Tessa got a little more insistent. By Christmas, she was telling Nathaniel in front of me, in our living room, that Mom isn't being realistic about her limitations. Nathaniel just nodded. He stared at his phone. He's been staring at his phone for 10 years. Then in February of last year, Eleanor fell. She'd gotten up in the night to use the bathroom, and her foot caught on a rug. Hairline fracture in her hip. Not bad, but she needed help for about 6 weeks. I was doing it. I was doing fine. I cooked, I cleaned, I drove her to physical therapy. I helped her in and out of the shower. 46 years of marriage, you learn each other's bodies. It wasn't a hardship. It was love. Tessa came over on a Tuesday. I remember because I was watching the Cavs game on mute in the other room when I heard her voice rise in the kitchen. Dad isn't capable of this kind of care, Mom. He's almost 70. What if he falls too? What if you need something in the middle of the night? Come stay with us, just for a little while, just until you're stronger. This time, Eleanor was tired. Tired in her body and in her spirit. The surgery had taken something out of her that hadn't quite come back. And I, fool that I was, I encouraged it. I said, "El, maybe a few weeks. They've got that nice guest suite. You can rest without worrying about me hovering." She went. She packed a small suitcase, kissed my forehead, and got in Tessa's Lexus on a Sunday morning in late February. That was 13 months ago. For the first week, she called me every night. Then it was every other night. Then every 3 or 4 days. Tessa or Nathaniel would always be the one to call back if I rang and Eleanor didn't pick up. "She's resting, Dad?" "She's in the bath, Dad." "The physical therapist is here, Dad." "She's having a bad day with the headaches, Dad. Let's not bother her tonight." The first time I drove the 45 minutes out to their house in Hudson, Tessa met me at the door. Eleanor was napping. Tessa said the doctor said no visitors for 2 days because of an infection scare. I sat in the foyer for an hour, then I drove home. The next time I went, 2 weeks later, Nathaniel was there. He took me out to the back deck and said, "Dad, listen. Mom's been confused, like really confused. She doesn't always know where she is. The doctor thinks the surgery might have caused something. We're getting her tested for early dementia." He wouldn't look at me when he said it. He looked at the grill. I didn't believe it. I knew Eleanor. We'd talked on the phone 3 days before, and she'd remembered our anniversary, the name of our first dog, the way I take my eggs. But Nathaniel said the doctor said it would be confusing and upsetting for her to see me right then, and could I please give it a few more weeks? I gave it a few more weeks. Then I gave it a few more. Each time I tried to visit, there was a reason. She was sleeping. She was with the therapist. She was having a bad day. She was at a specialist appointment. The phone calls got shorter and stranger. She sounded distant. She sounded sometimes like she was reading from a script. Once she said, "I'm fine, Russ. Please don't worry about me. I'm being well taken care of," in this flat tone that made me think she was being watched. In May, Nathaniel asked me for $90,000, said it was for specialized memory care equipment and a part-time aide for Eleanor. I sent it the next day. In July, another $45,000 for medical specialists not covered by insurance. In September, $30,000 for home modifications to keep Mom safe. In November, Nathaniel called and asked if Eleanor and I had ever set up a power of attorney. He said it would be easier for him to manage her medical care if I just signed mine over too, in case something happens to you, Dad, God forbid. I told him I'd think about it. I told him I wanted to talk to my lawyer. He didn't like that. 2 days later, he called and said Eleanor had pneumonia and was in the hospital. He gave me the name of a hospital in Cleveland. I drove there immediately. 90 minutes in pouring rain, my chest tight as a fist. The hospital had no record of an Eleanor Bennett. I called Nathaniel from the parking garage. He said, "Oh, Dad, sorry, I meant the other one, the one on the east side." I drove to that one. Same thing, no record. I'd called him back, shaking. He said the doctors had moved her to a rehabilitation facility. He'd text me the address, and then he hung up. The text never came. I drove out to his house in Hudson. The doors were locked. The cars weren't there. I sat in my Buick in their driveway for 2 hours in the dark, in the rain, and nobody came home. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat at our kitchen table and I started writing things down. Dates of phone calls, amounts of money, times I'd been turned away, things Eleanor had said in her flat, scripted voice. I'd been an engineer for 41 years. You don't keep a bridge standing by ignoring stress patterns. I'd been ignoring stress patterns for a year. I called my lawyer the next morning, a man named Theo Pruitt, who'd been my golf partner for 20 years. I told him everything. Theo listened without interrupting, which is the most unusual thing a lawyer can do. When I was done, he said, "Russ, don't sign anything. Don't send any more money. And don't tell your son you're talking to me." Then he asked me a question I'll never forget. He said, "Russ, where is Eleanor right now? Do you actually know?" I started to cry. 68 years old in my lawyer's office on a Wednesday morning, and I cried like a child because the answer was no. I had no idea where my wife was. I hadn't seen her with my own eyes in over 10 months. Theo helped me hire a private investigator named Camille Boyd. Former Akron PD, retired 3 years, took on cases like this on referral only. She was a small woman, maybe 5'3", with white hair cropped short and the eyes of somebody who'd seen too much and wasn't going to pretend otherwise. We met at a Bob Evans off the highway. She listened, took notes, and at the end she said, "Mr. Bennett, I'm going to be straight with you. What you're describing has a pattern. Elder financial abuse with isolation. I've worked 7 cases like this. In 4 of them, the spouse was already dead by the time we found out. I'm not telling you that to scare you. I'm telling you so you don't waste another day." I didn't waste another day. Camille put a low-profile surveillance on the house in Hudson. Just watching. Watching who came, who went, what got delivered. After 8 days, she called me. "Mr. Bennett, there's something you need to know. There's a delivery from a medical supply company 3 times a week. Adult diapers, liquid nutrition. The kind of nutrition you give someone who can't chew. Your son and his wife are both at work during the day. There's no nurse coming. Nobody's going in that house during the daytime except the deliveries, which get left on the porch and brought in at night." I sat in my Buick in the Giant Eagle parking lot with the phone to my ear, and I couldn't breathe for about 30 seconds. Eleanor couldn't chew. They were feeding her like a baby, and nobody was checking on her. I asked Camille what to do. She said, "We could call Adult Protective Services. That's the right answer. But APS will take 3 to 5 days to send anybody, and your son's a homeowner with no priors and a clean story. They might let him talk his way through one visit and then he moves her. If you want her out tonight, we do it a different way." I told her, "Tell me what to do." Here's where I have to tell you what I did, and I'm not proud of all of it, but I'm not ashamed either. I called Nathaniel that evening. I made my voice shake. I told him I'd been feeling chest pains. The doctor wanted me to come in for a stress test the next morning, and could he and Tessa please come stay at my house on Saturday and Sunday because the cardiologist said I might need a procedure on Monday and I shouldn't be alone. I told him I was scared. I told him I loved him. I told him I was sorry I'd been difficult about the power of attorney and that I wanted to sit down and sign everything when he came over. Because what if something happened to me? There was a pause on his end of the line. Then he said in this warm voice, "Dad, of course. We'll be there Saturday morning. Don't worry about a thing." I hung up the phone and sat in my recliner and I shook for 15 minutes because I just heard for the first time in clear daylight that my son was relieved. Relieved that I was sick. Relieved that he might inherit. My boy that I'd taught to ride a bike on Edgewood Drive in 1987 was relieved. Saturday morning came. Nathaniel and Tessa pulled into my driveway at 10:15 a.m. Tessa brought another casserole. They settled into the guest room. They asked about my symptoms. I performed for them. I let my hand tremble a little when I lifted my coffee cup. I forgot the name of the cardiologist twice. I called Nathaniel Nate Bug, which was what Eleanor used to call him when he was 4, and I let my eyes get wet when I said it. While they were settling in, Camille Boyd and 2 Hudson police officers and 1 social worker were 45 minutes north at their house with a welfare check warrant that Theo Pruitt had helped expedite the day before. I'd given Camille my spare key, the one Tessa had asked me for in case of emergencies 4 years ago, that I'd kept a copy of because Eleanor had insisted. At 11:47 a.m., while Tessa was making me a sandwich in my own kitchen, my phone rang in the bedroom. I'd left it there on purpose. Tessa heard it and her head snapped toward the hallway. I said, "Oh, that's just my brother in Florida. He calls every morning. Let it go to voicemail." She watched me. I watched her watching me. The phone rang again 2 minutes later, then a third time. Then a text came in that made my pocket buzz. I'd put my phone on a wireless charging pad in the bedroom, but I had my smartwatch on. I glanced at it like an old man fumbling. The text was from Camille. It said, "Found her. Alive. Going to St. Vincent's. Hold them. Hold them. Hold them. Hold them." That meant don't let Nathaniel and Tessa leave the house. The police were going to come pick them up. I'm going to skip ahead a little because I can't write this part slowly. They had Eleanor in a back bedroom on the 2nd floor of their house. The door had 2 dead bolts on the outside. The room had been stripped of furniture except for a hospital bed and a commode. The windows had been screwed shut and covered with blackout fabric. She was strapped to the bed with medical restraints. She was alive. She was conscious. She was severely underweight, dehydrated, covered in pressure sores, and her hair had been cut very short. My guess is to make her easier to manage. She had been receiving just enough nutrition through a feeding tube to keep her body alive. She had not been receiving the medication she needed for her thyroid or her blood pressure or the antidepressants she'd been on since 2011. She knew me. When they brought me to St. Vincent's that night and I walked into her room, she knew me. She couldn't speak yet. Her voice was gone from disuse, but she reached for my hand, and she squeezed it, and her eyes filled up, and I knew my Eleanor was still in there. The doctors told me she would have died within 4 to 6 weeks at the rate she was deteriorating. They told me her cognitive function was largely intact. There was no dementia. There never had been. Nathaniel and Tessa were arrested in my living room at 20 p.m. on Saturday, April 6th. I was sitting in my recliner pretending to watch a basketball game. When the officers came in through the front door, Tessa dropped the plate she was carrying, and it shattered. Nathaniel looked at me. He looked right at me. And he said, "Dad, what did you do?" I said, "I think you know." He started to cry. 43 years old, my only child, on his knees on my living room rug, sobbing into his hands. And I have to tell you something honest. I felt it. The pull. The instinct to go to him, to hold him, to tell him it was going to be okay. 43 years of being his father. That doesn't shut off. It doesn't even dim. I felt it in my chest like a hook. But I thought about Eleanor in that bed. I thought about 13 months of her lying in the dark. I thought about her hand reaching for mine at St. Vincent's. I stayed in the recliner. I let them take him out in handcuffs. Tessa was screaming about a lawyer. Nathaniel wasn't saying anything by then. He just looked at me as they walked him through the front door, and I looked back, and that was the last time I saw my son outside of a courtroom. The investigation found things I'm not going to put in this story, because Eleanor doesn't deserve to have every detail of her suffering published. But the basics are these. Tessa had forged a power of attorney about 10 months in. She'd been signing checks against our accounts using Eleanor's name. They had drained $410,000 from the accounts I knew about and another $180,000 from a brokerage account I didn't realize they'd accessed. They had a buyer lined up for the cabin in Geneva on the lake. They had documentation in Tessa's laptop on a folder labeled Estate Plan that included a draft will leaving everything to Nathaniel with my forged signature. They were waiting for me to die. They were going to help me along, I am certain of it, once they'd gotten the power of attorney from me. The chest pains performance I'd given on the phone had been a gift to them. They had brought a bottle of Eleanor's old blood thinners with them that Saturday in Tess's purse, which the police found, and which is now part of the evidence in the attempted murder charge. The trial is set for this October. Tess's attorney is going for a plea. Nathaniel has not spoken to me since his arrest. Eleanor has been home for 9 months now. She came back to our house on Edgewood Drive in late June. She had to learn to walk again. She had to gain back 28 pounds. She had to remember what daylight on her own face felt like. The pressure sores took 4 months to heal. The nightmares, she tells me, are getting better, but not gone. She wakes up some nights and reaches for me, and I'm right there, and I hold her hand until she falls back asleep. We sit on the back porch in the mornings now. We drink coffee. I made her a wooden bird feeder last fall, and we watched the cardinals come. She laughs sometimes. The first time she laughed, in August, I had to leave the room because I didn't want her to see me lose it. I want to tell you what I learned because I think the people watching this need to hear it. I'm not a wise man. I'm just an old engineer from Akron, Ohio, who almost lost everything because he didn't want to see what was right in front of him. Love your children. Love them with everything you have. But love does not mean blindness. Love does not mean writing checks without asking what they're for. Love does not mean accepting strange answers from strange voices on the phone. Love does not mean ignoring the instinct in your gut that says something is wrong here. The instinct in your gut is the most loyal thing you own. It will not lie to you. Other people will. People you raised will. The mother of your future grandchildren will. The boy you taught to ride a bike on Edgewood Drive in 1987 will. But your gut won't. If you are over 60 and you're watching this, do these things today, this week. Don't wait. Talk to a lawyer about a revocable trust, not just a will. Set up 2-factor authentication on every financial account you have with your phone, not theirs. Tell at least one person outside your immediate family, a friend, a sibling, a neighbor, where your important documents are and what your wishes are. Get a safe deposit box your children don't know about. Keep a journal of phone calls and visits and amount you've given, not because you don't trust them, because the version of them you trust may not be the version you're talking to. And if you have a feeling, the kind of feeling I had at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday last October when I sat in my Buick in an empty driveway in the rain, do not ignore it. Call somebody. Call a lawyer. Call the police. Call Adult Protective Services. Call anybody. Because the worst thing that happens if you're wrong is that you embarrass yourself for an afternoon. The worst thing that happens if you're right is the thing that almost happened to me. Eleanor's reading a book in the living room as I record this. She's wearing the blue cardigan I bought her for Christmas, the one I almost didn't buy because I thought it might be too plain. She's 70 years old, and she's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I don't know if I'll forgive my son. I don't know if forgiveness is even the right word. I know I love him still, in a place I can't reach and can't kill. I know I will never let him near her again. I know those two things at the same time, and they sit in me like two stones in the same pocket. If you're watching this and you've been through something like this, or you're going through it now, or you're afraid you might be, please leave a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I read them. Everyone. Eleanor reads them too when she's strong enough. We're not alone in this. None of us are. That's the only good thing I've learned from this whole story. Thank you for listening to me. God bless you and the people you love. And please, please look at them. Really look at them while you still can. I've thought about this every single day since Eleanor came home. Not the police lights in my driveway, not the deadbolts on that bedroom door. I think about the moment 4 years ago when I wrote the first check to Nathaniel without asking a single question. because that was the moment everything started, and I didn't feel it. That was the hairline crack in the foundation, and I walked right past it humming. Here's what I've learned. Every choice we make is a seed, and we don't get to choose which seeds grow and which ones don't. The day I decided that loving my son meant never questioning him, I planted something. The day I told Eleanor she was being paranoid about Tessa, I planted something. The day I sent $90,000 for memory care equipment without asking to see a single receipt, I planted something. 13 months of my wife strapped to a hospital bed in the dark grew out of those seeds. I planted them myself. Nobody else did that for me. Nathaniel and Tessa are responsible for what they did, and they will answer for it. But I have to be honest about my part, because if I'm not honest with myself, I will never be honest with anyone else again. There are 3 things I'm trying to live by now, in the time I have left. The first is to be a good man in small ways every day, not in big ways once a year, to pay attention, to tell the truth even when it costs me, to not look away from what's right in front of my face just because looking hurts. The second is to keep using my mind. I'm 68, not dead. I read the bank statements now. I ask hard questions, I trust my gut, and I check the locks. The mind God gave you, or nature gave you, or whatever you believe, that mind is yours to use until your last day. Don't surrender it to anybody, especially not to people who say they love you. And the third thing is this. Strength is not what I thought it was when I was 40. I used to think strength was being able to provide, being able to fix things, being the one who knew. Real strength, the kind I needed last October when I sat in that empty driveway in the rain, is being able to admit you were wrong. Being able to admit you were wrong. Being able to ask for help. Being able to keep going after the worst day of your life and still get out of the recliner the next morning and make coffee for the woman you almost lost. Eleanor laughed yesterday. A real one from her belly, watching a sparrow chase a squirrel off the feeder. I sat there listening to it and I thought, this is what we get. Not certainty, not safety, just this. The chance to do better tomorrow than we did yesterday. The chance to plant different seeds. That's all any of us get. Don't waste it the way I almost did.